Good afternoon. I hope you had a lovely lunch, and I'd like to welcome you to my den. We're here all afternoon. I'm sure a few of you will flit in and out and catch your aeroplanes, but we're going to run through a set of papers that really have very little theme to them, but hopefully they're going to be really engaging. I was going to tell you the 10 things that you need to be good at to be a market researcher. I've only got time for 9, so in my Q&A, I want you to suggest the 10th thing for me. So we're going to run through that set. The first is, you've got to be a kick-ass presenter. I want, in the future, every time we have a marketer and a brand developer and somebody from HR and somebody from the C-suite and a market researcher there, I want everybody to know that the market researcher is going to be the best presenter. And I want you to deliver on that promise. Because we're going to have to work harder. Our data is not as important as the finance guy's data. So we've got to make our message much stronger. And what does that mean? It means you've got to be really good with PowerPoint. Don't use Prezi or interactive graphics or infographics or anything dynamic until you can be good with PowerPoint. Because it's not about the tech. It's about presenting. It's about you. It's about being the star on the stage. And you can do that with PowerPoint. Once you're good with PowerPoint, by all means get rid of it and start using some of the really innovative, the Guelphs, coming up with something like running R in real time. But actually, if you're crap, Prezi just shows that you're crap and actually makes the audience feel a bit sick as it's spinning around. So we're going to be kick-ass presenters. The second one is we have to be collaborators. This is part of the material we looked at in a workshop on Monday. There's too much new stuff. When Reg and I started in this industry, you could actually learn the whole of market research. It wasn't very big. Now, people tended not to. They learned the whole of quant or they learned the whole of qual. But the whole of was a concept. Now, you're lucky if you know the names of every technique. We had telemetrics the other day, yesterday being talked about as a new research technique. I was in Singapore and they were talking about recognology, recognition technology. So even keeping with the language is hard work. It's multidisciplinary teams. We've got to work together. We've got to collaborate. Being a team leader, being someone who can make other people do the job well, is going to be one of the really core skills. Okay, correlation and causation. We are going to be about the only people that care about this. We really need to get it through. When somebody from the C-suite says, if we could only stop Internet Explorer, we could keep our guns because there wouldn't be any murders. No, we've got to spot correlation and causation and spurious correlation. There are now websites out there that simply mine data to find spurious correlations. And some of them are superficially appealing. And don't underestimate people's ability to be dumb. So this was printed in the New England Journal of Medicine. And it correlates the amount of chocolate consumed per head of population, or per stomach of population, by the number of Nobel Prizes won. And there is good medical evidence and neuroscience that says chocolate has a beneficial act on your thinking. So they did this as kind of an April the 1st joke, look at spurious correlations. However, a lot of the popular press picked this up as a real story. And there are lots of reasons why it's spurious, but the best reason in here is that is chocolate consumption from 2 years ago, and that is Nobel Prizes won in the last 100 years. Eating chocolate today does not improve your Nobel Prize performance 100 years ago. That is not cause and effect. But we are going to be the only ones that care about cause and effect. And it's the cornerstone of marketing. Marketers want to know they do something, and then sales change. You do something, and then behavior changes. Causation is massively important to us. Marigolds. Marigolds are very important in homeopathy. And we had a great debate on my LinkedIn group recently about, can you believe in homeopathy and be a market researcher? And we picked on that one because there's a lot of scientific evidence, and it's pretty well agreed that homeopathy doesn't work beyond placebo and nocebo. And we then extended that debate and we said, well, maybe we should get rid of the homeopathists, and anybody who believes 4 is unlucky, anybody who believes 13 is unlucky, anybody who says touch wood, anybody who believes in the multiverse and non-refutable scientific theories, anybody who thinks the world's 6,000... And I suddenly realized there's only me left. And I'd be very selective about which crazy beliefs I'd remove, because I kept all mine in. I would like to get rid of private property, for example. Maybe that's not evidence-based. So we have to be constructive skeptics. Some of the stuff we've seen in the last 2.5 days is junk. Some of it is really good. We are the best people for telling the difference. Our clients can't be expected to. The end users of research in an organization, they're going to have to take somebody's assessment of whether this really is good stuff, or actually whether it should be taken with a pinch of salt, or whether it should be completely ignored. So we have to be the constructive skeptics. But that's not enough. I could be mean if I had more time and ask you who these people were, and a few of you would know. I think actually, Reg, you went to school with Vanderbilt, didn't you? So we've got Vanderbilt here, who, making a fortune with shipping, says, I'm going to go into railways. You can imagine what the market researchers have said. Pooh, railways, there's not a lot of people traveling on the railways. That's because there aren't any trains and any rails. But he has that vision, he goes forward. Rockefeller, oh, oil, it's just a commodity. You know, I think we could brand it. I think we could have Standard Oil, you know. And then we could get a discount for moving it on the trains. And then if they start to screw us on the trains, we can start having pipelines. Would market researchers have helped Rockefeller, or would they have said, oh, I think that's a bit dangerous, we want to throttle back? But Carnegie's the one that I love the most out of these. He sees a great big river, and he says, we need a steel bridge. Problem was, nobody built steel bridges, because the technology wasn't quite right, and nobody was making enough steel. So you can imagine the market researchers saying, well, we've got a supply-side problem here, we've got a demand problem there. He goes on and he creates a steel-making industry to build the things he wants to build out of steel and makes $1 million out of it. So what is the lesson for researchers? We need to get away from being no. We need to get away from being maybe. We need to get away from being yes, but. And we need to learn to say yes, and. Yes, you can do that, and I think we can do this and this and this to make it an even better idea. One of the reputations of market researchers inside organizations is that we are the blockers. We need to be seen as the improvers. Now, yes, some of the time that means the idea is going to be improved in a way that means it doesn't happen. But the thrust of what we do has to be about improvement. We need to move away from Gaussian thinking to Bayesian thinking. If I tell you there are 3 taxi drivers, Abel, Bert, and Charlie, and one of them had a crash, old-fashioned stats, 1 in 3 chance. If I also tell you that Charlie's had 15 crashes in the last year, and the other 2 have never had a crash, you're going to take a flying guess on Charlie being the one who's had the guess this time. That's how we live our lives. That's how we're going to have to work with data much more in the future. And you've probably heard these phrases, hierarchical Bayes, popping up from the odd presenter. We had it from Aaron Reed. We had it from Steve Cohen. You need to know about this stuff. Read Nate Silver's book, Signaling the Noise. It's in there as well. All over England, we have these triangulation pillars. How do you measure the height of a hill in the middle of the country when you want to measure it above sea level and you can't see the sea? British way, you build these pillars about every 2 miles across the whole country. You go from the sea to the first pillar, and then you triangulate out to the next pillars and the rest of it, and you end up with a map that starts off with relativities and ends up with absolute values. Qualitative researchers have always known that we have to triangulate our findings. Now that we're using non-probability samples, that we're using dodgy methods some of the time, we have to validate those methods with things like triangulation. This is for the sci-fi fans. We've had plenty of sci-fi on this one. This is from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, Babelfish. We are the translators. The C-suite, senior people in the companies, they have a business problem. We hear the business problem, and we translate that into propositions that can be researched. We then change those propositions into language that respondents and participants can understand. We then get the answers back, and when they say, yes, I will definitely buy it, we translate that back to management as saying, probably try it, but probably not, because we're translating what the research means. So it's all about translation. It's two-way translation. Business problem to research problem, research results back to the business. But the most important thing is that we need to be illuminators. Insight is perhaps part of that process, but that's really that's more like the drills and the holes in the wall. And I'm always doubtful about this holes in the wall analogy, because actually I want shelves. I don't really want holes in the wall. I buy drills to make holes in the wall to put shelves up or to put pictures up. So we've only just moved the problem one along if we start talking about holes in the wall. But we need to be the people who create the light for people to implement the decision. Sometimes we will implement decisions. Sometimes we will go in there and we will say, you should sell this brand and you should buy this new factory and you should do that. Oftentimes, we won't have the information to do that. But we should always be able to provide the illumination that working with people, they can see the right decision. We need to be like the refrigerator. You open the door and the light comes on. Because you know when it's an insight, the light comes on. You actually understand what people are saying. So those are my 9 tasks, my 9 things that I want you to learn as we go forward. What are your suggestions for the 10th one? But you can applaud first. So we've got a hand mic. I don't know whether we need it, but we'll run. Well, actually, we just go. Excellent. Okay. So, Sammy.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably an underlying theme of all of the 9, but I'm going to steal his. But being open-minded, and basically sometimes not just trusting your intuition, but actually just reading things in hard research.
Yeah, I think that's a good skill. Somebody else. Put your hand up, shout it forward, or I'll pick on you. You're absolutely right, but also I think we need to understand that we're in that business. I meet market researchers who don't think they're in the marketing profession, who don't realize that we do this stuff so that more stuff can be sold, the right stuff can be sold to the right people at the right time at the right price.
I was going to ask, do you see researchers becoming more objective? Do you want establishing the objectives instead of answering questions that are asked of them? That seems to be kind of the vein of where this might be.
Absolutely. Proactive, I think, could be like the 10th label too. I remember John Shanahan several years ago, a Kiwi based in Australia, very successful. And he was saying, one of the problems is that we wait for people to come and ask us questions, and then we try to find out. We should be going and knocking on the door and saying, I've got the answer to your churn problem. What do you mean I didn't ask you a question? I know, but I've got the answer to your churn problem. We don't have a churn problem. You do. Let me show you. Your churn is actually this much worse than everybody else in your industry. It's worse because... And we need to start being proactive, whether we are client side, whether we are agency side. Frankly, even if you're a sample provider, and we see a little bit of this from Pete Cape at SSI, who's beginning to say, let me tell you how to do your research a bit better, because I'm sick and tired of just answering your questions. I want to start telling you about what I can see. And we need to be in that proactive business. Reg, so. And I'm going to extend that for some advice from Sheryl Sandberg, where she's talking about women. But actually, it's true of market researchers. We've got to sit at the table. So if somebody invites you into a meeting that's 4 hours long and they say, if you could come in at about 2 hours through and tell us the results, you say, I want to be there from the beginning because I need to hear the previous conversation to be able to factor it in. And I think I better stay to the end so that I can answer any extra questions. Do not just go in for your bit. And please, 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 we've got to, if we could set it to about 4 minutes now, that'd be great. If you're invited in, 4 agencies are invited into a client side to present. You're presenting at 1 o'clock. Go for the whole day, listen to the other agencies, engage, because your client thinks you're worth hiring. Your client thinks these other companies are worth hiring. You can learn stuff, and you can mesh what they're doing into what you're doing. Sorry, Reg.
I think talking around the key issue here, which is you really need to understand the client's business, the competitive sets, the dynamics in the marketplace that they're in. If you don't understand that, you can't possibly know.
Absolutely, and that is a change. Again, when I started in research in 78, you tended to be a researcher. On Monday, you might do dog food. On Tuesday, finance. On Wednesday, you do auto, because you were a specialist. You were good at surveys, questions, focus groups, or whatever. Now you have to be good at your client's business in order to be able to make any sense of it. Bernie.
I'm just wondering also from a human capital perspective, we have a historical model that the elders teach the youth. And clearly, I think we all recognize that the model is flipped, that the teacher can learn more from the student sometimes than vice versa, and especially if we think about all these amazing technologies. So I would say that we have to create a culture within an organization that allows us to foster that flipping of the triangle, if you will.
Absolutely. I think there are 2 or 3 really fascinating things that I see happening in agencies. One is, normally if you get a job now as a bright graduate entering a company, you will go through more than 1 interview process. You'll have to they'll give you some data, you stand up and you make a presentation. And you're hired on the ability to do that. And then for 2 years, you're not allowed to present to clients. And you learn the really dumb ways of presenting your company has before you go out there and do stuff. And so I have a rule when I'm working with people. Everybody on the team who's going to the client meeting is presenting. Nobody looks like they're the bag carrier. And they present on the bit they know about. So if they did the coding, they'll present about the coding. If they did the checking process, then they will talk about that. It's all right, come on in. Come on in. We're just all talking. Well, I'll take a couple more, and then we're going to be ready for Sammy and Perry's presentation. So anybody else got something else that they're going to chime in about what you want young... Yes?
Maybe break the rules from time to time. Basically not be afraid to break the rules, because we seem to be stuck in the past in many cases. We're talking about respondents when we shouldn't. We talk about representativity when we shouldn't.
Yeah, I think breaking the rules is great. You do have to tell millennials, because sometimes you say, I want you to break the rules. You say, does that mean you won't tell me off if I get it wrong? Hell no, I'll tell you off. Grow up, get used to it. Toughen up, I think is the phrase. But that's part of learning. You've got to make mistakes to learn. You've got to make them, and you've got to move forward. And there has to be a permission, but it's not going to be a carte blanche. And you've got one final comment from somebody or anybody? Excellent. Okay, well, big round of applause for yourselves. And we're going to move on to the next presentation from Sammy and Perry. And they're going to give us a glimpse.